Welcome to my channel. My name is Eli, also known as the Scorpion Librarian, because I'm a Scorpio and this is my digital library. It's been some time since I posted my last YouTube video, 8 months to be exact. I really went into the year 2025 thinking I was going to be able to post once a week, but I slowly realized that wasn't very sufficient and I found myself posting things I did not like. So when April came around, I just gave up. But now that it's 2026, I'm giving myself more grace and I'm thinking we're going to post maybe once, maybe twice a month. I just want to be able to read books and share that with you folks and be able to finally dissect books in the way that I want to and the way that I enjoy, and hopefully you will enjoy it as well. This video, however, is not about dissecting books. Well, maybe a little. In 2025, I was able to read 65 books, and I really want to go through them and rank them from 65 to number 1. Something else I'm going to do to challenge myself is to not look up these books. I'm going to try to explain each one just from memory, also to test how much I was able to retain the information. So this video is going to be ranking all the 65 books I read in 2025 from memory. I did already make a list on my laptop of all of the books I read, just so I know the title and author, and I also put how many stars I gave each. There will be spoilers in this video. I'll try my best not to give anything away, but I feel like I do have to talk about each book if I want to explain how I felt about each one. And since there are 65 books to go through, I'm going to try to go as fast as possible, but I would recommend getting a drink and a snack because I'm assuming this video is going to be a long one. At number 65, I have Volleyballs by Lain. I gave this book 1.5 stars. This is the very first MMM romance I've ever read. I went through a phase in November/December where I was reading a bunch of volleyball MM romance-based books, and this one was not good. It is about 2 Australian beach volleyball partners who come to the States to compete in a tournament, and one of them is not out, and he ends up falling in love with a local queer artist. And then somehow the partner, who is very homophobic, gets roped into it. This book was just very unrealistic, and it very felt like someone's fantasy in not a good way. After finishing the book, I researched the author, and she is a 60-year-old white woman, straight white woman. So this was basically me reading her fantasy, and I did not enjoy it one bit. I gave this book 1.5 stars. At number 64, I have The Devil and Miss Prym by Paulo Coelho. I like Paulo's writing, but for some reason I did not like this book. It was the very first book I finished in 2025. From what I can remember, it is about a man who comes to a very remote town and gives him some sort of ultimatum, and somehow the devil is involved, and Miss Prym is the one who gets to decide. With that being said, I gave this book 2 stars. Number 63 is Football Sundae by Daryl Banner. This book is one of many in Daryl's series when it comes to his make-believe town in Texas, where each character falls in love with someone and they're all sort of related in a way. I recognize that a lot of MM romance books are kind of like this, where they have characters in the same realm and each have their own book. This one I did not like because it was very cheesy. I do like the football aspect of MM romances, but this one did it in a way that was not enjoyable, and I hate when spice is the center of a book. I like when spice supplements and complements the book, if that makes sense, and this book did not do a good job about that. You know it's bad when you have to skim through the spicy scenes because it just doesn't make any sense. With that being said, I gave this book 2 stars. Number 62, I have Arkoma by Calum Lott. This is a book I saw someone post on TikTok, and it intrigued me because I had just finished the first 3 books of Red Rising, and this book was proposed as a futuristic cowboy heist novella. It was a very quick read, but it did take me 2 months to finish because I was very bored most of the time. The main character was very unlikable, and I did not like the world that they lived in. And I can't remember anything else. With that being said, 2 stars. This next one is very controversial. At number 61, I have The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. I'm a firm believer that I would have loved this book more if I read it first. I did read it after Queen of Shadows and before Heir of Fire, which was a big mistake. I felt like having to pause and read this book really slowed down my momentum, especially since I didn't really like Throne of Glass, and Queen of Shadows following it was very, very good. This book put a pause to that momentum in a way that I did not like. I actually think I would have liked Throne of Glass more if I read Assassin's Blade first. Getting to know Eileen and her personality would have helped going into Throne of Glass. Maybe in the future when I reread the series, I'll come back to this rating because I will be reading it first. I did give it 2 stars. At number 60, I have Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. This is the 3rd book in the Murderbot Diaries. I really love Murderbot. He's one of my favorite book characters that I've met in 2025, but this book I did not like. I can't even tell you what the book was about, and I gave it 2.5 stars. Number 59 is another book I see a lot of people like, but I didn't really. It is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Part of the reason why I did not like this book is because I saw myself in the main character in the way that he was still trying to hide the fact that he was gay, and I guess it was just too triggering for me to enjoy, and I did not like the ending. Can I remember what the ending is? No, but I just remember not liking it. I gave it 2.5 stars. At number 58 is Rust and Stardust by Arteus Rosewood. This is a book about a gay man and his best friend who work for the same marketing firm in New York, and they have to go back to the friend's hometown, which is a small town in Texas, in order to steal recipes so that they can market it and get promoted in their company. And when they do come home, the main character ends up meeting the heartthrob of the town who everyone loves, and for like the past 4 years has won the carnival chili making competition, and they know they have to steal that recipe because that's the one that's going to get them promoted. I did not really like this book because, first off, you're going back to your best friend's hometown to steal recipes knowing that the best friend knows everyone and is basically friends and family with everyone who lives in this small town. So that was kind of odd. And also, this book was really cheesy. I saw everything coming. Nothing was a surprise. The spicy scenes were good. It was instant love, but I think it was drawn out too long. It took too long for the author to get to the reveal of the real reason why the main character was there. And for that reason, I gave it 2.75 stars. At number 57, I have The Buddhist Teachings, an introduction by Thanissaro Bhikkhu. I very much butchered that. This is a very short read. I remember watching The White Lotus last year, as we all did, and it was based in Thailand, and I was interested in learning about the Buddha, and from all the Google searches, it was telling me this short story or short lesson passage was a great place to start, and I guess it was. I can't tell you what it really said, but I gave it 3 stars. At number 56, I have Astonishing Times #1 by Frank J. Barbiere. I believe this is a superhero comic graphic novel. I do have a tablet which I like to use to read graphic novels because my Kindle is not in color. This was a good graphic novel from what I can remember. It just wasn't good enough for me to read #2. So with that, I have it at 3 stars. Number 55 is another graphic novel called Love and War by Andrew Wheeler. This one was about a school where tug of war was their main sport, and their school was across the river from a more popular and dominating tug of war school, and it was basically the story of them beating them. Again, for this one, I did not read any more of the series, and that's why I gave it 3 stars. At number 54, I have All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries. Again, love Murderbot. I hated the story. Couldn't even watch the TV show because the story was so bad. I give this 3 stars. Number 53 is Strong Side by S.R. Clarke. This is another volleyball MM romance story. This was the last book I read in 2025, and I cannot tell you what it's about. I'm pretty sure it's about a boy who goes to university and his partner gets in trouble with the law and gets kicked off the team, and the person he does not like on the team's partner also got injured for the season, so they got paired together, but they're like from totally opposite worlds. Like one is on financial aid and needs the volleyball to basically live, and the other one comes from a rich family. And this book was also very cliche. It was pretty instant love and then falling in love on the volleyball court. And in the end, the rich one has a shed dad. And to F his dad, he basically is like, I never used your money. I don't, it was just not it. He like never used his dad's money, but made his own money off of real estate while in college and playing volleyball. It was very out of the blue, and it was cute when the poor one brought him, or the rich one bought, because they are in Florida, the rich one bought a flight home for him to San Diego to see his family, who he never sees, and the rich one finally gets to see what a good and happy family is like, and they fall more in love. It's so ridiculous. With that being said, I give it 3 stars. At number 52, I have Lovelight Farms by Bhikkhu Borison. I don't read hetero romance books, especially hetero-themed romance books. This is a Christmas story about a girl who owns a Christmas tree farm and is basically going under, so she enters a competition where a famous influencer is visiting different people and their occupations, and at the end will choose someone to give 100 grand to. And she lies on her application and says that her and her boyfriend run the farm. And her quote-unquote boyfriend is her best friend, who she's known and loves for a very long time in a friendly way. And she asks him to pretend to be her boyfriend so that they could film whatever the influencer wanted to do. And it's basically a story of them pretending, even though he is obviously in love with her. He lives in New York and they live in a small town, I believe in Rhode Island or somewhere near New York, and he drives to see her all the time and instantly agrees to be her fake boyfriend. The one thing I did like about this book is the spice is kind of spicy. Like when it's women writing about hetero spice scenes, I'm into it, but when they write spice scenes, I'm like, you don't know what's going on. I only read this book because I was doing a small challenge on my TikTok reading my followers' favorite books, and I'm kind of glad I did. I never would have read it if no one suggested it. I gave it 3 stars. At number 51, I have Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I have a lot to say about this book. First off, it was a good book. I give it that. I'm not sure if it deserves to be number 51 on this list, but it just is. My main reason for not liking this book is, well, I have 2 reasons why I don't like this book. One, I felt like this book relied very heavily on nostalgia. It was just one hit after another of dopamine of familiar characters that we already know, and using names of people we know to signify the importance of what was happening in the story. I really like Haymitch as a character, but I don't think this book did him justice. We didn't get enough of who he is. We got his backstory, yes, but I don't think Collins did a good enough job explaining why he is the way he is in what we know in the original trilogy. And you would think she would have, because this book is basically the story of his reaping and how that all went down. But I think this book could have been better if Collins decided to write this book from when he won the reaping and what happened after. I think this book would have been so much better if it was about his victory tour and coming to terms with all the consequences that are happening now for what he did in the games. I wouldn't have mind if there was like a part 1 where everything was condensed, where we learned from the reaping until the end of the games, and there was a part 2 where we went through the whole victory tour. I'm not sure if there are plans for more books in the future surrounding Haymitch, but this book really felt like you need to read this in order to watch the movie, and it was basically written just for the movie. I gave it 3 stars. At number 50, I have When Ben Loved Him by J. Bell. This is a MM romance book. J. Bell is a very popular MM romance book author. He has a very popular series that I'm not remembering the name of, but whenever I tried to read it, I didn't really like it because it was in third person, and I believe it was written over 10 years ago, so it was very corny. But this book is a retelling of the characters from that series, but in first person and a little expanded on. And oh my god, it is so much better. I really love the main character, Ben and Tim, and their story of how they fall in love. I think this book is really interesting to read because it is how I imagined my life in high school would have been like if I had the bravery to sneak around with a boy, and how secretive it would have been. And I don't know, this book was kind of living that fantasy. I unfortunately did not experience that, but I'm pretty sure that this book does a great job explaining of how it would have gone. I gave it 3.25 stars. At number 49, I have Running with the Wind by Shira Anthony. This is book 3 in the Merman of Aos series. This is my least favorite of the 3 in the trilogy because I did not like how the story ended. It felt very rushed, and I believe each book was published 1 year after the other. I'm not sure, due to contracts or something. So yeah, this book just felt very rushed, and the ending was not satisfying because of how the second book ended was so momentous and incredible, and this one was kind of just like a downhill the entire book. I don't know why I put this higher than all the other books before, but I did give it 3.5 stars. At number 48, I have the graphic novel Mooman #1 by Kyle Higgins. This is another superhero type graphic novel. The only reason why I read it is because Kid Cudi is involved, and I don't remember anything of it, and I did not read any more issues after this one. 3.5 stars. At number 47, I have Foster by Claire Keegan. This is a very popular bookish and book talk book, and I just had to read it just to find out if it was something for me. And spoiler alert, it was. I love a short novella to add to the reading read list. It wasn't anything special. It was just a story about a family who couldn't afford one of their kids, and they basically sold her to a family who couldn't have kids for a moment in time until they could afford to bring her back. I wasn't really aware of the cultural importance of this book, but a lot of people seem to like it. I gave it 3.5 stars. At number 46, I have The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This was my first time reading the original trilogy. I did not really read it growing up because I was more of a Harry Potter and Twilight type of girl. I did watch the movies growing up though, and I recently watched them back in 2024. So when I saw these 3 books in my local thrift store, I had to get them, and it was a sign to finally read them. The Hunger Games was alright. I did not like Katniss as a character in this book. She's a very unreliable narrator, and honestly, she's probably the first unreliable narrator that I've encountered with all the books I've read in recent time. And because of that, I gave this book 3.5 stars. I'm not sure why this book is so low, but at number 45, I have A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. This is another novella type book that is about a man who ends up dying, and he is in hell, which is basically a giant place, library type of thing. And he has his own little colony, and they can run to different sections of the library where other people live. And the story is basically him falling in love with people and living his life in this hell, and a lot of it is him trying to find the end of hell, where he's running for years, thousands of years, and it's just emptiness and nothing and books, and he just keeps running into different pods of people. And again, I don't know why this book is so low on my list, because I think about it all the time. Whenever I'm about to go to bed, I think about running for thousands of years in this hell. I gave this book 3.5 stars, but I should have gave it something much higher, just for the impact it's had, because I think about it all the time. At number 44, I have Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. When this first came out in late January, I was so excited to read it because I had just finished Fourth Wing and Iron Flame in 2024, and those 2 books I like to credit as the books that got me back into reading. And oh, was I so disappointed by Onyx Storm. First off, the first couple of chapters were so confusing. I've seen a lot of people say this online, but they also were confused as to what was happening and where we started off with the story. Them going to the islands was kind of questionable to the timeline of the story, and then the ending was just something I that didn't make sense. I am a firm believer that in the next books we are going to get an Onyx Storm revision or like an Onyx Storm retelling, because I forget the name of the character, but one of them can wipe memories. I'm pretty sure this entire book is told from Violet's wiped memory point of view, and that's why it felt so out of place, and we were meeting characters we didn't really meet in the first two books as if we already knew them, and things were just happening out of nowhere, or things were explained out of nowhere. I really think we are going to get a redo of this book, and this was purposely done to confuse us because Violet literally lost her memories. And in the next book, we're gonna get all those memories back and get the full story of what happened during Onyx Storm. I did like the cliffhanger though of her being married and then her and Xaden being connected. Xaden is one of my favorite characters throughout all the books I've read recently, so I really hope they do him justice in the next couple of books. I give this book 3.5 stars. I will also like to shout out this book because I never read books the day they come out. The last time I did this was back in 2007 when I went to the Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows premiere at my local Borders. So it's been so long since I've did this and I really miss it. It gave me a rush of nostalgia and such a happiness that I knew when I was a child of going to all of the Harry Potter book premieres. So I do credit Rebecca Yarros for having that lasting impression on me. At number 43, I have The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd. This is another book I did for my TikTok challenge. It was one of my followers' favorite books. Not much to say about this book. It is a good read. It is very much a high school or middle school summer reading type of book where there are cultural and world implications that are important to learn about and how they affected the home of a normal American. This story is about a young girl who lives in the South, and the Civil Rights Movement and Civil Rights Act just happened, and her mom is dead, her dad's a drunk, and she basically is over her dad and gets her nanny, who's basically her family slave, to run away with her to find where her mom is from or where her mom has been, because in her belongings she finds a picture of a black Virgin Mary. And it turns out it is the label of three sisters who are black who live in South Carolina, and they own bees and a honey company. And she ends up going there and basically finding what a true family is like and learning to come to terms with what she did to her mom, because spoiler alert, she killed her mom. The one thing I liked about this book is how they talked about mental health, because one of the sisters was very suicidal and had mental issues. The author did a great job of talking about her issues in a way that seemed normal, and the way her two sisters reacted and treated her was like a normal person. And I thought that was very important, especially for a book that was published in 2001 and was very popular. I'm glad a lot of people got to see that side of a mental illness. I gave this book 3.5 stars. At number 42, I have Crossing Arizona by Bree Wiley. Bree Wiley is an author who wrote one of my favorite books of 2024, Finding Delaware. This is the second book in the series, and it is a romance book based off of two other characters in her little world. This book is just so low on my list because Finding Delaware was probably in the top 3 of my books read in 2024, and the two characters in this book I did love, but not as much as the other two, and I couldn't really relate to the two characters in this book. This was another that I read the day it was released, and overall it was a good read. I gave it 3.75 stars. At number 41, I have Empire of Storms by Sarah J. Maas. This book is so low on my list for 2 reasons. One, I love Tower of Dawn, and tandem reading the two really made me hate Empire of Storms, because most of the time I wanted to just read Tower of Dawn. And I found that so funny because most of the things I saw on TikTok and on YouTube is that no one really likes Tower of Dawn, and they only tandem read Empire of Storms because they know of the plot twists and cliffhanger that happens at the end of EOS, and they didn't want to have to read all of TOD to know what happens. I was the complete opposite. Anytime I had to stop reading TOD, I was so pissed. The second reason why I don't like this book is I don't like the way Eileen acted in this book. I felt like all the decisions she made was behind the curtain. multiple times in this book something would happen, and then we would find out that Eileen did something behind the scenes to make it happen, and I don't really like that type of storytelling. I'm not sure why for this book SJM went with that approach, especially since she didn't really do it in the previous books. I guess the cliffhanger was very cliffhangery, but again, since I was so enthralled with Tower of Dawn, the cliffhanger really didn't mean much to me. I gave this book 3.75 stars. At number 40, I have Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. This is the second book in the Murderbot Diaries. I like this one the most out of the 3 that I read last year because he had a friend, and that friend was funny, and I liked their interactions, and they both remind me of the robot from, or not robot, the alien from Project Hail Mary, now that I think of it. But I gave this book 4 stars. I'm not sure why, because I don't remember much about it. That's it. At 39, I have Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This is another short story novella type book by Claire that I read in 2025. This one I did like more than the other one because of the lasting impact it had on me. I feel like, just like A Short Stay in Hell, I think about this book a lot. If you haven't read it, I don't want to spoil anything since it's such a easy read and so impactful for how short it is. You should just read it. It is well worth it. I give it 4 stars. At number 38, I have Thrown a Glass by Sarah J. Maas. It took me about 3 months to finish this book because I couldn't really get into it. Again, I didn't really like Eileen as a character, and something about her I just did not like. My favorites in this book was, of course, Dorian and Kale. I really thought they were going to end up together at the end of the story. There were so many books I was thinking that there was going to be some sort of kissing that was going to happen, but unfortunately it did not. I gave this book 4 stars. At number 37, I have The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. This is a very short and easy read. This book is the epitome of that meme, would you still love me if I was a worm? The main character wakes up dating a giant beetle and his life moving forward and how his life crumbles around him. And it's just a case study of the human condition and the relationships we have with the people we love and the people within our lives. And I gave this book 4 stars. At number 36, I have When Ben Loved Jace by J. Bell. This is the second book of the first one I talked about earlier. I did like this book a lot more because the main character Ben was in his adult years of his life, and I could relate more to that since that's when I basically came out. And this story is about his love for someone new named Jace and how Tim also came back into his life. This book was 4 stars for me. At number 35, I have Hexmate by Blake R. Wolf. This was a story about a earth witch who wasn't really strong, but his dad is very powerful, so he ends up going to their world's magic school where there are witches, there's goblins, I think, there's wolves, there's fairies, there's all type of magical creatures, but the witches are basically the strongest there because they have the most powers. And this is the story of how he falls in love with the alpha werewolf. And yes, they do the deed, and yes, they do it in his transformed form. This was the first time I ever read that type of story, and beyond that, this book was really cheesy, but I really loved it because it was a very dom-sub type of situation, and the entire book just felt like a big hug from an 8-foot werewolf man. This book was 4 stars. At number 34, I have Stealing the Wind by Shira Anthony. This is book 1 in the trilogy. I was bored one day and was looking up categories in Goodreads. I like to do so just to expand my books whenever I'm trying to look for something to read. And I stumbled upon Merman romance list there, and this was the top book to read, so I gave it a shot, and overall I really liked it. I did not think the story was going to go where it went from reading the first couple of chapters, which I love. I gave this book 4 stars. At 33, I have Echoes of Us by Alex Cross. This is the last volleyball romance I read for 2025. This is probably the only book I've ever read where I did not like the ending, and probably one of the only books I've ever read where I wasn't cheering for the two main characters to be together. This book is about a boy named Addy who is a volleyball player, and he goes to college and meets a boy named Noah. Noah comes from a rich family and he has a lot of drug and alcohol problems and was also on the volleyball team but ends up getting kicked out of school, so he's no longer on it. The one thing I did not like about this book is Noah was 20, 21, and Addy was about 18, 19 in the story, and I did not like the way Noah weaponized his addiction to basically a child, because I remember being in college my freshman year, 17, 18, and looking back, I was a child and I was making decisions like I was a grown adult, which I shouldn't have been doing. And I just saw myself in Addy in the way he was being manipulated by Noah, by someone older, someone he thought he was in love with. I like the story because it does flashback from present time, which is 3 years after they first met, and from when they first met. Overall, it was a very good story, but again, I was not rooting for them in the end. I gave this book 4 stars. At number 32, I have Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I kind of went on a kick last year where I started listening to classic novel audiobooks. I always had a hard time reading them because they felt like homework, but once I started listening to them, they were much more enjoyable, and I'm glad I did because this book was very, very good. This book is very this Maddie meme from Euphoria, is this play about us? Because even though this book was written years ago, everything that happened in this book is pretty much still applicable to things we are experiencing today. All I can remember from this book is him seeing the young girl who was a neighbor that was different, and then them not being there anymore. And then I remember loving the one scene where he tells off his wife's friend and them being firefighters but burning books because no one could learn anything, and how he just couldn't resist stashing books away, and of course getting caught and meeting that one guy who basically they probably see as like a conspiracy theorist, and him having like the clan of people who also are conspiracy theorists, and they only recite books to each other, I believe. Is this the same book? Either way, I gave it 4 stars. At number 31, I have Lord of the White Hell, Book 1 by Jin Hale. This is another book I found on Goodreads and under the Romanticy category, I believe. And it is about a boy who has gotten a scholarship to go to a school in another country, basically. And his country is seen lesser than the one he's going to, so he's already being set up as like a lesser than student that everyone hates. And he is actually a very smart engineer. And of course, he ends up falling in love with the most popular guy there, who is, everyone doesn't really like him. They're more so afraid of him because he's a duke of his, wherever he is from. And all the men in his lineage all have the power of the White Hell, which is basically a demon. And it's just a story of them navigating school and falling in love. And I'm a sucker for these types of books. I gave this one 4.25 stars. And number 30 is another classic audiobook I listened to, Animal Farm by George Orwell. I'm pretty sure I read this book before, but I haven't in a very long time, and this is another Is This Play About Us book. I remember listening to this book on my daily morning walks and just giggling out loud because everything the pigs did was just so ridiculous, and it's basically a portrayal of what happens in politics and how you can't really do anything to stop it. 4.25 stars. At number 29, I have One Way Ticket to Earth by Daniele Vaccaro. This was a very, very short story. The author actually reached out to me via DMs on TikTok to read it, which I was grateful for. It was such an easy, quick read. I remember crying at the end, and this is another one I don't want to spoil because if I spoil it, it gives away the ending. If you ever get a chance to read this book, I would definitely recommend it. I give it 4.5 stars. At number 28, I have Children of Solitude by Michael G. Williams. I believe I read the arc for this book. It's one of the many cool things I get to do now that I post regularly on TikTok. I have authors reach out to me to read arcs, which I love. And Crossing Arizona, I believe, was also an arc. So that made 2 last year. This is what I would categorize as a paranormal romance thriller. I know those are a lot of words, but they all do apply. This is basically the story of a older gay man who goes back home to his North Carolina Appalachian home because his mother has passed, and he ends up finding out that his mom's house is haunted, and it has to do a lot with the Appalachian area and the folklore. How do you say that word? Basically the folklore, whatever that word is, but it has to do with the Appalachian people and their belief in spirits and whatnot. But probably the most funny thing about this book is he, while visiting and trying to clear out the home and fighting basically the ghosts that run in and out of the house, he ends up finding out that his favorite OF performer is her neighbor because his mom basically made a community in that little town, and she owned all the land but was able to build houses for everyone to live there, and one of them was owned by his favorite OF creator, and that's who he ends up falling in love with. I didn't think I would end up liking this book, but I think the ghost aspect was very complementary to the gay aspect of this book, and being gay wasn't the main focal point. It was more so about the paranormal situations they were getting into, which I really loved. I gave this book 4.5 stars. And now I'm thinking about it, I'm only on book 28. Well, technically book 29 was 4.5 stars, so I think in 2026 I need to rethink my ranking system because 29 books above 4.5 stars is kind of crazy. At number 27, I have Box 1663 by Alex Sorel. This is another book I found on Goodreads under the historical fiction. I have a history degree and I don't really use it, so whenever I get to read some sort of fiction or nonfiction book that is history related, I'm so totally in. I was so glad I found this book. It is about a American ex-soldier and a British scientist who both meet in New Mexico on a military base during World War II. And plot twist, they're on the military base that created the atomic bomb. And the only way I knew this was about 40 pages in. The girl that the ex-soldier works with in the photo hut on the military base called someone her Uncle Oppie. And I was like, oh, that Uncle Oppie. I remember really enjoying this book. It is about how those two guys fall in love while being on this military base and also basically testing the atomic bomb everywhere. And there's this rogue side plot of a military spy that it was kind of unnecessary, but I guess it made the story more interesting. Yeah, being gay during the war, both being, well, one being a soldier, one being British, and also building the atomic bomb. It was a lot to mix together, but it somehow worked really well. I gave this book 4.5 stars. At number 26, I have Lord of the White Hell, Book 2 by Jen Hill. This book was so much better than the first one. It explored their lives outside of school, which I really enjoyed. I can't remember much about it, but I did give it 4.5 stars. I think this is one I have to come back to reread in 2026. At 25, I have Still Out of Place by Christy Passion. This is a collection of poems by her that are very Hawaii coded and Hawaii related. If you have lived in Hawaii or you're from Hawaii, I would recommend this book because every single poem is very relatable. I gave it 4.5 stars. At 24, I have Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This was my second favorite out of the original trilogy. I guess I liked this book. I really liked how it ended and how book accurate the movies were. I think I will explain further in the future, but coming off of Catching Fire, this made this book not as good. I did read all three basically in 4 days, so if that gives you perspective. I give this book 4.5 stars. At number 23, I have Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. I could not tell you what this book is about. I'm trying to wrap my head around what happened. For some reason, I keep thinking this is Crown of Midnight. This book was the one before the Tandem read. I think I just remember, is this when Sorsha and Dorian were a thing and we got a lot of Manon in this book? I could not tell you. Reading the Throne of Glass series was such a blur for me because that was basically all I read for 3 months. But I did give this one 4.5 stars. At number 22, I have Into the Wind by Shira Anthony. This is book 2 in the Merman of Ea series. I love this book so much. This one was so fast paced and there were so many twists and turns, and the ending was so incredible and I did not see it coming. If this book series ever becomes a TV show or a movie, I really hope they spend most of their time developing this book. It was amazing. I gave it 4.75 stars. And I'm realizing again, I have 22 books. Well, actually, it looks like I have some that are 4.5 still. I guess we're not going according to the ranking system. For some reason, I have a few 4.5 stars left, so we'll review those now. At 21, I have Game Changer by Rachel Reed. This is the first book in her series. I read Heated Reverie once I found out the TV show was coming out sometime in late October, early November. I did not know much about the series. I just know that it started to get a lot of popularity, but it was nowhere near where it is right now. So I read this book after reading HR and watching the first 2 episodes of the TV show, because I found out the 3rd episode was going to be based off of this book. So I ended up speed reading through it. I didn't really like the first half of the book, but the second half was so good. And even though I knew it was going to happen, I ended up in tears at the end. And it did make me love Scott and Kip so much. I rated this book 4.5 stars. At number 20, I have a book that should have been much higher, because like the other ones that I put in this category of should have been rated higher, I think about it all the time. It's The Fireborn Blade by Charlotte Bond. This was a very interesting book to read because it was alternating chapters between the story and chapters about the history of the world they live in, which I ate up. I loved it so much. It's basically the story of a woman and her squire going into a dragon's cave lair to steal gold or to steal his treasures or something. But again, each alternating chapter was a history of her people's life with dragons and historical things that happened in their society throughout the years. And I thought it was just such an interesting take on explaining the lore of the world and also having the story happening at the same time. It was very pleasing to read. I gave it 4.5 stars, but this one should have been a 5-star. At 19, I have Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. Again, like I explained earlier, I really did not like Throne of Glass, so coming into Crown of Midnight, it kind of boosted how much I liked it because it was so much better than the first. And I can't remember her name, but her friend that was the princess of the other realm who ended up unaliving, I really liked her storyline in this book. And I'm pretty sure this is when we finally meet the doorknob, or have we already met the doorknob? He's probably my favorite underrated character in the Throne of Glass series. I gave this book 4.75 stars. At 18, I have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is a book I was very excited to read because of the TV show coming out. I knew going in I could not read it because I don't really like math, and this whole book is basically one giant math equation. So I went with the audiobook, and that was such a great decision. Being able to listen to the math equations was not as bad, and being able to hear the alien talk was so cute. And this is probably the best audiobook I listened to all year. I gave it 4.75 stars. Also, Ryan Gosling is not my Rylan Grace. I'm not sure why he got the gig, but it should have been like Paul Rudd or Mark Ruffalo or like an up-and-coming young actor, anyone but Ryan Gosling. But I still will be watching the movies, I think. At number 17, I have Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas. This book is one of my favorites of the series. I really love the story of Eileen and Rowan and how they got to be where they are. And this was from what I remember, the first introduction of the multiple chapters of the other characters that kind of got more blended into the story. It felt very Lord of the Rings, where everyone is on their own separate journeys and, they'll eventually all meet up in the end. I love this one. I gave it 4.75 stars. At 16 and 15, I have Nightwing Volume 1 and 2 by Tom Taylor. This is the 2016 edition run of the comics. I really love Nightwing. He's probably my favorite superhero, especially in the DC universe. And I heard a lot of good things about Tom Taylor and his run that he did back in 2016. These first two volumes were so good. I love the drawings and the colorization of the comics, and I gave both of them 5 stars. I would do anything for Dick Grayson, so anything that Dick Grayson is in, I'm gonna love. At number 14, I have The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I gave this book 5 stars. It is a very short story. Now that I am thinking about it, I do not remember what this book is about, but I just know that the author published it in the local newspaper back in the 1800s, early 1900s, and I know she had all the girls gagged. She gagged them all with this story, and that's all I remember, but it was 5 stars apparently. At number 13, I have Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas. I basically have this book so high because it was the final ending to the entire journey that I was on for 3 to 4 months. Obviously, I gave this book 5 stars. It had everything I needed. All of the journeys and different routes were all connected perfectly. And I thought the last 20% of the book, I was in tears the entire time because it was so overwhelming and it was so satisfying to finally get to that point. Again, I didn't really feel that type of feeling since reading Harry Potter as a child and finally getting to the Battle of Hogwarts and finally Harry facing Voldemort. Like, that's what Kingdom of Ash gave me, and for that, again, I gave it 5 stars. At number 12, I have We'll Always Have Summer by Jenny Han. This is a book that I read back in 2020, I believe, during COVID. I heard that The Summer I Turned Pretty was being turned into a TV show, so I read all of the books before the first season came out. I reread it in 2025 prior to the last 3 episodes, I believe, of the TV show of season 3, mainly because I wanted to be refreshed of what was happening in the final book. And this book always has me ending in tears. Conrad is one of my favorite book boyfriends ever, and this book is so good. I give it 5 stars. And I'm so excited for the movie to come out because we get one more glimpse of Conrad in the future. It's so funny that I have this Paulo Coelho book at number 11. It's The Alchemist, in reference to me having the Devil and Miss Prym solo on this list. It made me realize it wasn't Paulo the author, it was just the story that I didn't really like. I remember my junior year English teacher used to read The Alchemist to us out loud for some reason whenever we had extra time throughout the class period. But reading this as an adult was so interesting and so enlightening because it really emphasized how the journey is so much more important than the destination. And for that reason alone, I give it 5 stars. At number 10, I have Call Me By Your Name by Andre Osman. This is a book that I did listen to, and it was narrated by he who must not be named. And although having him narrate this book did get confusing sometimes because I could not differentiate his voice from Elio's inner dialogue, I still gave this book 5 stars because it is such a classic to me. The movie is one of my favorite movies, and I just love the way Andre writes, and it's just so stream of consciousness type of writing that I really adore and try to implement into my own writing. And again, this is a story about love and not a love story, and I just loved everything about it. At number 9, I have Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli. This is a book that I used to read all the time when I was young. It's probably one of the first books I remember loving as a child. It's a story about a boy who goes to middle school or high school, and a new girl ends up showing up who is so different than everyone in the school, and her name is Stargirl. And it's basically the journey about how she's so different and everyone's so intrigued by it at first, and then eventually everyone starts to hate it. And then eventually she changes to be like everyone, and everyone starts to love her again. And then slowly she unravels and basically blows up because she's no longer who she is. She's being forced to be someone she's not. And the whole time, the main character is in love with her and basically dates her and learns more about her. And this story is just so impactful, and whenever I read it, I end up in tears because it's about being who you are and being loved for who you are. And this is obviously a 5-star read. At number 8, I have The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Steven Chbosky. This was a reread. I practically reread this book every year because I love it so much. I first discovered this book off of Tumblr back in 2007, 2008. And when I used to go to school in California from 2011 to 2015, it was always my benchmark to read it on the flight home. whenever I would come home for winter or summer vacation, because it was such a grounding book for me. I don't like to talk much about this book because it is so much happens in it that is related to mental health issues that I can relate to. Charlie is probably one of the few characters that I can see myself 100% in, and this book is home for me. That's why I reread it every year, and if you haven't read it, you certainly should. The movie is also very, very excellent. Logan Lerman did an excellent job of portraying Charlie. Again, this was 5 stars. At 7, I have Harriet Tubman live in concert by Bob the Drag Queen. I did not expect to like this book. I do love Bob, and when I found out he was writing a fiction book, I really didn't think too much about it. I thought it was just another cash grab that most drag queens do whenever they write a book. Most of the time they do nonfiction, so it being a fiction book really intrigued me, and I must say this book was very surprising. I read it in one sitting, and the main character's interaction with Harriet and her band was so important to read about and so interesting. And again, as a person with a history degree, this did showcase a lot of things that happened at that time and how it relates to time today. If you ever get the chance to read this book, I would highly recommend it. I gave it 5 stars. At number 6, I have Alchemized by Sin Lin Yu. I did not read Manacled, but I did hear a lot about it. My one thing I did not like about Alchemized, even since I did not read Manacled, I could easily pinpoint which characters were related to what HP characters in the book, and it did take me a long time to get past that comparison. But once I did, this book was so amazing. I listened to the audiobook, about 85% of it, and I listened to it over a 2-week span of walking every morning, and it was the one thing I looked forward to every day. Being able to walk along the beach and listen to the story was amazing. Both main characters were so good. I wish it was not split up the way it was with part 1, 2, and 3. I wish the book was in the order that it happened, mainly because by the time part 2 ended, I had completely forgotten everything in part 1, because part 2 was so jam-packed and so eventful and so much happened that part 1 really didn't stay fresh in my mind. It also could be because the book is like 1,000 pages, but I really wish if I ever reread it, I'm gonna read it part 2, part 1, part 3. And I also did not listen to the last 15% of the book because I knew I had to read it. So I read it and was in tears. And she was a non-active member. That's all I'm gonna say. 5 stars. Okay, we're getting into my top 5. These are 5 books that made my year basically, and I think about all the time, and I'm practically going to reread every year, so don't be surprised if you see this video next year and it's the same top 5. At number 5 is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. This is a book I read for the first time, and it's the first Kurt book I've ever read in my life. I understand why people love him. I really like his writing style, and again, just like how I said about Andre Osman, it's very stream of consciousness type of writing that I really enjoy. And this story is basically PTSD exemplified, and I always explain to friends whenever I recommend it to them that this book feels like what shrooms is like. Did that make sense? This book feels like how being on shrooms feels like, and how your brain is just basically jumping from one idea to the other. I don't want to spoil too much about this book because if I do, it'll ruin it. I really would recommend it. I give it 5 stars. At number 4 is the final Sarah J. Maas book in the Throne of Glass series, Tower of Dawn. I can't emphasize this enough. I was the number 1 Cale hater after the first couple of books. I did like him in the first book, and then once 2nd, 3, 4, 5, it was a no-go for me. Whenever his chapters or something related to him came up, I was like, can this be over? But Wyrene really saved him for me. And having his redemption arc in the story and seeing him basically be rebuilt by Wyrene was just so amazing. And I loved every single second of this book. And I really liked being in the separate country that they were in and not their world. It was interesting to see a different side of what was happening as far as the war that they were basically about to get into. And again, I preferred this book over Empire of Storms. This was an easy 5-star read for me. At number 3, I have Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. This was my favorite book out of the original trilogy. I read this book in 2 hours, I think. I was tanning in my backyard and bullets through this book. It was so good. I loved the interactions between all of the characters. The ending was amazing. We saw Katniss's love for Peeta more in this book. It was so fast-paced, and not at a pace that was too fast, but a pace that was just right to run along with all the storylines, and everything connected beautifully. And yeah, it was a 5-star read. I think I'm going to reread this book soon. Okay, here we go. My top 2 of 2025. At number 2, I obviously have Heated Rivalry by Rachel Reed. I'm going to say this, but don't look too much into it. Heated Rivalry is a typical romance book. I know a lot of people who like the TV show and have read the books aren't familiar with romance as a genre. Heated Rivalry is a typical romance book where you have 2 people who are enemies, they have conflict, they end up falling in love, and you get the happy ending. And then you get to see 2 people that they're related to, like I stated earlier, in their world, have a separate book, and you can move on to that book if you want to. But what Rachel Reed does in Heated Rivalry, which I don't know how she knows this, I do know she is queer and her husband is queer, so they do have the queer perspective, but she was able to write in a way that was very believable to not only the sports world, but also the MLM world. I don't know how she did it, but like I said earlier, I hate when spice gets in the way of a story and doesn't complement it. Rachel does a great job with using spice scenes to complement her writing and not to supplement it. I felt like all the spice scenes were not out of nowhere, and they all had purpose, and they all were for a reason. And I've already read this book twice since first reading it in late October, November. I reread it right before the finale of the TV show came out, and this was one of my favorite books in 2025. It's obvious 5 stars. Here we are, finally at my number 1 book, and to no surprise, it is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I believe this is my 3rd time reading this book. The first time was back in 2018, and then I reread it during COVID, 2021-ish. So it's been a couple years since I've read this book, and I swear every single time I reread this book, I discover new things, and it hurts worse than the last time. This time around, I did start to highlight and annotate my copy. That way, whenever I do reread it, I can read those as well. There's not much to say about this book. If you haven't read it, I don't know what you're doing. You should be reading this book immediately. It's the retelling of Patroclus and Achilles and their life during when they were kids until their death in the Trojan War. And this book was such a great example of loving someone for who they are and loving them so much that you understand every single piece of them and you want to spend eternity with them. I'm literally about to cry. That's how much I love this book. Obviously 5 stars. So those are all the 65 books I read in 2025 ranked. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it to this point in the video, please comment. He is half my soul, as the poets say, down in the comments below. That way I know you've made it this far. Again, thank you, and make sure to subscribe. Again, I'm going to try to post at least once, maybe twice a month. I do have a lot of ideas. I really like watching YouTube videos where people read books and talk about them, or I mean, obviously that's what most of these videos are, but like intentionally read specific books or series and talk about them. I have a few ideas that are brewing that you might see come soon. Also, let me know if you've read any of these books down in the comments and what you think of them, and if you agree with my ratings and my rankings and all of that. Thank you for watching. Have a great rest of your day.